2. The Wooden Google. Duration 30 to 45 seconds. Background music. Low, mysterious ambient drone. Sound of a heavy wooden drawer sliding open. Narrator: imagine a world where search wasn't a button, but a physical destination. Before the internet, human knowledge wasn't trapped in a cloud. It was locked inside thousands of tiny wooden drawers. These are the library index cards of the early 20th century. To most, they are just dusty scraps of paper. But to those who knew the code, they were the original algorithm. Every inkstroke, every punch hole, and every Dewey Decimal was a breadcrumb, leading to the world's greatest secrets. Today, we go back to a time when information had a weight, a smell, and a soul. Welcome to the history of the paper brain. Chapter 1. The Age of Information Darkness. Long before the world was connected by fiber optic cables and satellites, there was a time of profound intellectual darkness. Imagine walking into a grand library in the mid-1800s. To your eyes, it looks like a temple of wisdom. Towering mahogany shelves, the heavy scent of leather-bound books, and the hushed whispers of scholars. But beneath this beautiful surface lay a nightmare of inefficiency that would make a modern researcher weep. This was the era of the fixed shelf system, a time when libraries weren't organized by logic but by the physical whims of the building itself. In those days, a book didn't have a call number based on its subject. Instead, it was given a permanent address based on the shelf it sat on. If a librarian decided that a massive book on Roman history looked good on the third shelf of the fourth cabinet, that's where it stayed forever. But here was the catch. What happened when the library bought a new, even bigger book on Roman history? It couldn't go next to its brother. It would be placed wherever there was a gap, perhaps 3 rooms away in a dark corner next to a book on Victorian gardening. The library was a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces were constantly being thrown into a blender. To find anything, you had to consult the Great Ledgers. These were massive handwritten books that acted as the library's only map, but these ledgers were a disaster zone. Every time a new book was added, the librarian had to squeeze its title into the margins or cross out old entries to make room. If the librarian had shaky hands or a penchant for messy ink, that book was effectively lost to history. If a page tore out of the ledger, an entire wing of the library became a graveyard of nameless paper. People didn't search for books. They went on expeditions, often lasting days, just to find a single reference. The masala of this era was the sheer power held by the librarian. Because the system was so chaotic, the librarian was the only human being who actually knew where the good stuff was hidden. They were like the high priests of a secret cult. If a librarian didn't like you, or if you didn't tip them well, they could simply tell you the book didn't exist, and you would have no way of proving them wrong. Knowledge wasn't public. It was guarded by the gatekeepers of the mess. As the 19th century roared on, the world began to change. The Industrial Revolution was pumping out new discoveries every day. Scientific papers, political pamphlets, and novels were being printed at a rate the old ledgers couldn't handle. The great ledgers were literally bursting at the seams. Some libraries tried to solve this by pinning small slips of paper to the shelves, but a gust of wind or a stray sleeve could blow away years of categorization. The world was facing its first big data crisis. Scholars were losing their minds, libraries were running out of space, and the sheer weight of unorganized paper threatened to bury human progress. It was a chaotic, dusty, and frustrating world where a genius could spend a lifetime looking for a book that was sitting right behind them, hidden by a system that was designed to store books, not to find them. The stage was set for a revolution. The world didn't need more shelves. It needed a miracle made of cardboard. It needed a way to break the fixed shelf and set information free. Next, Chapter 2. the dictator of decimals. The chaos of the old libraries needed a savior, but what it got was a fanatic. Enter Melville Dewey, a man whose brain didn't just appreciate order, it demanded it with a terrifying intensity. Imagine a man who looked at the world and saw nothing but a messy room that needed cleaning. Dewey wasn't just a librarian, he was the first true information architect, and he ran his world like a military general. The masala starts with Dewey's own personality. He was so obsessed with efficiency that he thought the English language was wasteful. He tried to force people to change the spelling of words to save ink and time, wanting to spell catalogue as catalogue and philosophy as philosophi. He even legally changed his own name from Melville to Melville, and for a short time, he even tried to change his last name to Dewey. This was the man who was about to decide how the entire world would store its knowledge. In 1873, while sitting in a church service, Dewey didn't hear the sermon. Instead, he had a vision. He realized that every single thought, every book, and every discovery could be trapped inside a number. He created the Dewey Decimal System, a code that divided all human knowledge into 10 neat categories, from 100 for philosophy to 900 for history. But a system is just an idea. He needed a physical weapon to enforce it. That weapon was the index card. But Dewey's index card wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a masterpiece of obsession. He realized that for a global network to work, every single library in the world had to use the exact same card. He standardized the size to precisely 7.5 by 12.5 centimeters. If a card was off by a fraction of a millimeter, Dewey would consider it a failure. He didn't just invent the system, he turned it into a business empire. He started the Library Bureau, a company that sold the authorized cards, the authorized pens, and the authorized wooden cabinets. He was the Steve Jobs of the 1800s, creating an ecosystem where you either used his tools or you stayed in the dark. The drama intensified when Dewey opened the first school for librarians. He didn't just want workers, he wanted missionaries. He recruited a literal army of women, training them with military precision to write in a specific style called library hand. Every letter had to be identical, so that no human personality could distort the data. He wanted the library to be a machine, and the librarians were its processors. But Dewey was a complicated villain hero. His ego was massive. He was eventually kicked out of his own organizations because of his abrasive personality and controversial behavior. He was a man who wanted to categorize the universe but couldn't manage his own relationships. Yet his legacy was undeniable. He took the fixed shelf nightmare and replaced it with a fluid, moving, and infinitely expandable paper brain. By the end of this era, if you walked into a library, you didn't have to beg a librarian for help. You just walked up to a wooden cabinet, pulled out a drawer, and flipped through Dewey's perfect cards. He had successfully digitized the world, using nothing but cardboard and ink. The chaos was dead, and the reign of the decimal dictator had begun. Next step, Chapter 3. The Anatomy of the Secret Code. If Chapter 2 was about the man who built the system, Chapter 3 is about the machine itself, the index card. To a random stranger walking into a library in 1910, these cards looked like boring, repetitive slips of paper. But to a trained librarian, each card was a high-speed data packet, filled with secret symbols, hidden meanings, and a very specific masala of architecture. Think of the index card as the smartphone screen of the early 20th century. Every millimeter of that 7.5 by 12.5 centimeter space was prime real estate. At the very top left was the call number, the GPS coordinates of the book. Without this, you were lost in a forest of millions of pages. But look closer at the handwriting. This wasn't just neat writing. This was library hand. Librarians were actually forced to practice a specific style of calligraphy that removed all personal flair. No fancy loops, no artistic swirls. Why? Because the data had to be pure. The handwriting had to be so standardized that a librarian in New York could read a card written by a librarian in London without a second's hesitation. It was the first universal font. Then came the body of the card, the metadata. It listed the author, the title, the publisher, and the year. But the real secret lay in the tracings at the bottom. These were cryptic little codes that told the librarian which other cards existed for this same book. It was like the tags or hashtags you see on Instagram today. If you wanted to find books similar to the one you were holding, you followed the tracings. It was a primitive but brilliant way of hyperlinking one physical object to another. But here's the most dramatic part of the card's anatomy: the hole. Every single card had a small, perfectly punched hole at the bottom center. Through this hole ran a solid steel rod that locked the cards into the wooden drawer. This wasn't just for organization, it was for security. Librarians lived in constant fear of data corruption, which in their world meant a patron accidentally dropping a drawer and mixing up 500 cards. If those cards were shuffled, the library's brain would literally break. The steel rod was the read-only lock of the 1900s. It ensured that the knowledge stayed in its exact, dictated order. And let's talk about the masala of the red lines. Most cards had a vertical red line on the left side. This was the margin of authority. Nothing was allowed to cross that line except the call number. It was a visual boundary between the where, the location, and the what, the content. The index card was a masterpiece of compressed information. In a few square inches, it held the DNA of a 500-page book. It was tactile, it was physical, and it had a specific smell, a mix of high-grade linen paper and permanent black ink. When a librarian flipped through these cards, the sound, that rhythmic thwack thwack thwack, was the sound of a search engine processing data. It was the click before the mouse was ever invented. The card wasn't just paper. It was a silent, powerful soldier in the army of human knowledge. Chapter 4. The Human CPUs. While the Dewey Decimal System was the brain of the library, the librarians were its heartbeat. In the early 20th century, being a librarian wasn't about sitting quietly and reading books. It was about being a high-speed biological data processor. These women, and they were mostly women as Dewey believed they had the patient temperament for such grueling work, were the literal hardware that ran the world's first search engine. The masala of their lives lay in the brutal discipline of the library factory. Every day, thousands of new cards had to be generated, verified, and filed. This was a world of absolute zero tolerance for error. If a human CPU made a single mistake in a sequence, placing Smith A after Smith B, that data point was essentially corrupted. In a modern computer, an error might trigger a crash. In the library, a filing error triggered a permanent loss of knowledge. A book misplaced in the system was a book lost to the world. To achieve this inhuman level of perfection, librarians underwent rigorous training that felt more like a military camp than a school. They had to master library hand, a sterilized robotic style of penmanship. Any trace of personality, any artistic flourish in their handwriting was seen as a glitch in the system. Their handwriting had to be as uniform as a digital font, so that the user interface, the index drawer, remained consistent for every patron. They spent hours practicing the perfect A and the perfect 7, their fingers permanently stained with the blood of the library, permanent black ink. The physical toll was immense. Imagine standing for 10 hours a day, pulling out heavy oak drawers, flipping through thousands of cards with lightning speed, and using mental algorithms to find the exact slot for a new entry. They suffered from librarian's cramp and eye strain long before carpal tunnel or computer vision syndrome were ever named. They were the invisible army keeping the chaos at bay, working in a silence so thick you could hear the scratch of a nib on cardboard from across the room. These women were the gatekeepers. They held the keys to every secret, every scientific breakthrough, and every forbidden novel. They managed the social media of the 1900s, deciding what was tagged, how it was linked, and who could access it. They weren't just workers. They were the guardians of the collective human memory, making sure the paper brain never suffered a stroke. Every time you find a file on your computer today, you are walking on a path paved by the exhaustion and precision of these forgotten human CPUs. Next, Chapter 5. The Information Horror, the Ghost in the Stacks. In the digital age, a 404 error is just a broken link on a screen. But in the early 20th century, a broken link was a physical tragedy. Chapter 5 takes us into the dark side of the index cabinet, the moment the paper brain suffered a memory lapse. This was the era of the ghost book, a phenomenon where a massive, leather-bound volume existed physically on a shelf, but because its index card was missing or misplaced, it effectively vanished from the face of the earth. The masala here is the sheer high-stakes drama of the misfiled card. Imagine a high-ranking government official or a desperate scientist needing a specific document to stop a crisis. They rush to the library, pull open the heavy oak drawer, and begin the rhythmic thwack-thwack of flipping cards. But when they reach the spot where the card should be, there is a gap. A void. This was the ultimate sabotage. In world wars and political revolutions, spies realized that they didn't need to burn down a library to destroy its knowledge. All they had to do was steal a handful of index cards. Without the card, the book became a needle in a haystack of millions. It was data deletion in its most primitive and cruel form. A scholar could spend 40 years looking for a manuscript that was sitting just 3 feet away from them, hidden forever by the simple fact that its card was accidentally filed under M instead of N. There are haunting stories of drawer disasters. Imagine a tired librarian, late on a Friday evening, accidentally dropping a drawer containing 1,000 cards. In a split second, the alphabetical order of decades is shattered. The cards scatter across the floor like autumn leaves. If they aren't put back in the exact, surgical order, the entire section of that library becomes a dark zone. Finding a single misfiled card among millions was a task so daunting that librarians would sometimes have nightmares about it. It was like trying to fix a corrupted hard drive using only your fingernails. The index cabinet was also a place of secrets and information gatekeeping. Some librarians would intentionally misfile dangerous or subversive books to protect the public from radical ideas. If you couldn't find the card, you couldn't read the book. It was censorship by chaos. The physical nature of the card meant that whoever controlled the drawer controlled the truth. This was the silent horror of the paper era. The library was a labyrinth, and the index card was the only thread that could lead you back out. If that thread snapped, you were lost in the stacks forever, surrounded by millions of words that no one would ever read again. The paper brain was powerful, but it was also terrifyingly fragile. Chapter 6. The Sensory Symphony of Ink and Oak. To a modern generation, information is odorless, weightless, and exists only as pixels on a glowing screen. But in the golden age of the library index card, knowledge had a physical soul. It had a smell, a sound, and a texture that commanded respect. Walking into a grand library in the 1920s wasn't just a mental exercise, it was a sensory explosion. This was the chemistry of knowledge, and it felt like magic. The first thing that hit you was the scent. It was a heavy, intoxicating cocktail of aged paper, leather bindings, floor wax, and the sharp, metallic tang of permanent black ink. But the star of this aromatic show was the index card itself. These weren't made of cheap wood pulp, they were high-grade linen and cotton fiber. They smelled like a crisp, clean shirt mixed with the dust of 1,000 years. When you opened a drawer, a puff of information dust would hit your face, a physical reminder that you were inhaling the history of human thought. Then, there was the sound. A busy library wasn't silent, it had a rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat. It was the sound of hundreds of heavy oak drawers sliding open and shut, a deep wooden thud vrrrm, followed by the rapid-fire thwack 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 of fingers dancing over the cards. Librarians and scholars developed a musical ear for the drawers. A seasoned librarian could tell if a drawer was too full, or if a card was stuck just by the pitch of the sound it made. It was the white noise of the intellectual world, the sound of 1,000 brains searching for a single spark. The masala lay in the tactile power of the system. Finding a book was a physical journey. You didn't just type, you pulled, you flipped, and you touched. The cards had a specific snap to them. If a card was high quality, it felt stiff and proud. If it was old and handled by 1,000 hands, its edges were soft and furry, holding the oils and stories of everyone who had searched for that book before you. You could literally feel the popularity of a subject by how worn out its index cards were. A card for love poetry was often soft and yellowed, while a card for advanced calculus remained crisp and cold. And let's not forget the visual drama. The drawers were made of rich, dark wood with polished brass handles that gleamed under the soft glow of green-shaded lamps. Each drawer had a tiny label holder showing the alphabetical range, AAB, ACS. It was a beautiful, organized forest of mahogany and brass. The index cabinet was the most expensive piece of furniture in the building because it had to be perfect. It had to withstand the weight of millions of cards without warping, or the paper brain would jam. This was a time when searching for knowledge was a ritual. You had to use your muscles, your nose, and your ears. It was an intimate connection between the seeker and the sought. When you finally found the card you were looking for, and your finger rested on that specific ink stroke, you felt a sense of physical victory that a search button can never replicate. Chapter 7: The Forbidden Drawers, Censorship and the Secret Code. In the early 20th century, the library wasn't just a place of light, it was also a place of shadows. The index cabinet was a tool for organization, but it was also a tool for control. Not every card was meant for every eye. While the library claimed to be a temple of knowledge, there were forbidden floors and secret drawers that held books deemed too dangerous, too radical, or too scandalous for the general public. This was the era of the hidden index. The masala starts with the secret codes librarians used to tag books. If a book dealt with controversial politics, forbidden science, or immoral literature, the card wouldn't be filed in the main drawers. Instead, it would be placed in a separate cabinet, often kept in the librarian's private office. In some libraries, they used a red star or a specific delta symbol on the card. This was a silent warning to the librarian. Do not give this book to a commoner without permission. Imagine a young student in 1930 trying to find a book on revolutionary ideas. He flips through the R drawer, but the card is missing. It's not a mistake, It's information gatekeeping. The card existed, but it was hidden in a shadow index. If you wanted to read those books, you had to face the interrogation of the chief librarian. They would stare at you over their spectacles, judging if your character was strong enough to handle the dangerous words inside. The index card was the gate, and the librarian was the guard. But the drama didn't stop at morality. During the heights of the Cold War and the World Wars, the index cards became part of national security. Librarians were ordered to remove cards for books on explosives, certain chemical formulas, or maps of sensitive areas. These books became ghosts overnight. The physical book remained on the shelf, gathering dust, but without the card, it was officially deleted from the public memory. It was the ultimate, silent erasure. There was also the scandal of social engineering. Some librarians used the index system to steer the public's mind. They would put the cards for wholesome or approved books at the very front of the drawers, at eye level, while hiding the cards for dissenting opinions at the very bottom, where you had to break your back just to see them. They understood a fundamental truth of the digital age long before we did. If you control the search results, you control what people think. The index drawer was a battlefield of ideas. Behind the quiet, dusty atmosphere of the library, a war was being fought over what was fit to print and fit to find. Every time a librarian pulled a card from the public view and locked it in a private desk, a piece of the world's brain went dark. The index card was a weapon of liberation, but in the hands of the censors it was a silent, paper-thin prison cell. Chapter 8. The Battle of the Systems, the Global Information War. By the mid-1900s, the index card was no longer just a library tool, it was a global currency of power. But there was a problem. The world couldn't agree on how to talk to itself. A massive masala-filled rivalry broke out between the Dewey Decimal System and the Library of Congress classification. It was the 20th century version of Windows versus Mac, or Android versus iOS. This wasn't just about books, it was a battle for the soul of human organization. Imagine the drama. On one side you had the Dewey loyalists. They believed in the perfection of the decimal, the idea that everything in the universe could be broken down into neat 10-part segments. It was logical, it was mathematical, and it was growing like wildfire in public libraries across America and Europe. But then, the giants arrived. The Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. realized that Dewey's system was too small for the explosion of modern knowledge. They created a rival code, a complex mix of letters and numbers that could expand infinitely. The rivalry was bitter. Libraries that had spent decades and millions of man-hours creating millions of handwritten Dewey cards were suddenly told their system was obsolete. Switching systems was the 1940s equivalent of migrating a massive database today. It required an army of librarians to rewrite, restamp, and refile every single card. Tensions ran high at international conferences. Librarians from different schools would argue for hours over where a book on rocketry should live. Should it be under science, 500, or technology, 600? These weren't just numbers, they were territorial lines. But the masala went even deeper. It became an international ego trip. While America was fighting over Dewey and the Library of Congress, Europe was pushing the Universal Decimal Classification, UDC. This was an even more complex, hyperlinked card system. The creators of UDC, Paul Otlet and Henri Lafontaine, had a dream that was almost science fiction. They wanted to create a world city that housed every single index card ever written, linked by a giant mechanical system of pneumatic tubes. They were trying to build a physical internet in the 1930s using nothing but cardboard. This was a time of classification wars. If you walked into a library in London, the cards looked one way. In Paris, they looked another. And in New York, they were different again. It was a chaotic babble of information. Scholars were frustrated. They had to learn 3 or 4 different languages of cards just to do their research. Every library wanted its search engine to be the one that ruled the world. Millions were spent on standardized cabinets and proprietary cardstocks. It was a goldmine for the companies selling the wood and paper. The index card had become a giant industry, and the stakes were nothing less than the control of human memory. The world was desperately searching for a universal language. But as the cabinets grew taller and the cards multiplied into the billions, the system was reaching its breaking point. The paper brain was getting too big for its wooden skull. 9. The death of the drawer, the silicon invasion. By the 1960s and 70s, the paper brain was suffering from a massive stroke. The sheer volume of human knowledge was growing so fast that the wooden cabinets were taking up more space than the books themselves. Some libraries had miles of drawers, housing millions of cards. The human CPUs, the librarians, were drowning in ink and cardboard. The system was perfect, but it was too slow for the atomic age. And then, the killer arrived, the mainframe computer. The masala in this chapter is the heartbreaking clash between tradition and the future. Imagine a veteran librarian who has spent 40 years caring for her drawers. Every card in there is a child she has raised, alphabetized and protected. Suddenly, a group of young men in white lab coats arrives with a machine that hums, glows, and consumes massive amounts of electricity. They tell her that her entire life's work, those millions of handwritten cards, can be replaced by a single magnetic tape. This was the era of MARC, machine-readable cataloging. It was the first time the secret code of the index card was translated into binary. It was a digital ghost entering the physical machine. For a decade, there was a strange twilight zone in libraries. You had the old wooden cabinets on one side, and the flickering green screens of the first computer terminals on the other. It was a battle for the user's soul. Older scholars refused to touch the demonic screens, clinging to the smell and feel of the cards, while the younger generation realized they could search in seconds what used to take hours. The drama of the Great Purge began in the late 1980s and early 90s. Across the world, libraries made a brutal decision. They were going to close the catalog. This meant they would stop adding new cards. The thwack-thwack sound that had defined libraries for a century began to fade into a deathly silence. And then came the even more painful part, the disposal. Imagine thousands of beautiful handcrafted oak cabinets being dragged out to the curb. Millions of cards, containing the handwriting of generations of scholars and librarians, were tossed into dumpsters or sold as scrap paper. In some cities, there were literal funerals for the card catalog. People cried as they saw the universal memory being shredded. The paper brain wasn't just being upgraded, it was being lobotomized. But the computers were cold. They didn't have the library hand or the smell of linen. They offered speed, but they took away the physical ritual. The transition was messy. Data was lost in translation, names were misspelled in the digital migration, and for a few years the world's information was in a state of digital amnesia. The death of the drawer marked the end of an era where knowledge was something you could hold in your hand. The cloud was taking over, and Chapter 10, The Ghost in the Machine, The Eternal Legacy. The wooden cabinets are gone. The thwack-thwack sound of flipping cards is a memory buried in the archives of history. But if you think the library index card is dead, you are looking at the world with closed eyes. Today, we live in a digital empire built entirely on the foundation laid by Melville Dewey and his army of human CPUs. The index card didn't die. It simply became invisible. It evolved from a piece of cardboard into the very soul of the internet. The masala of the modern age is that every time you use a search engine, you're interacting with a digital ghost of the 19th century library. When you type a word into Google, the algorithm doesn't search the entire internet in real time. That would take forever. Instead, it searches an index. This is the exact same concept Dewey perfected. Google has a massive digital version of those wooden drawers, filled with cards for every website on Earth. We haven't invented a new way to find things. We've just made the cards move at the speed of light. Look at your social media. When you use a hashtag, you are using a digital version of the tracings found at the bottom of an old index card. When you see metadata on a digital file, the date, the author, the size, you are looking at the exact same categories that a librarian in 1920 would painstakingly write in library hand. The structure of our digital world is a one-to-one map of the old paper system. Even the folders on your computer desktop are just digital ghosts of the heavy oak drawers that once stood in the basement of the New York Public Library, but something was lost in the transition. The old cards held more than just data. They held human presence. You could see a smudge of ink where a librarian's hand slipped, or a coffee stain from a scholar who spent all night researching in 1945. You could see the physical wear and tear on a card for a popular book, telling you how many thousands of people had shared that same quest for knowledge. The digital index is clean, cold, and sterile. It gives us the what, but it loses the who. Today, those old wooden cabinets have become high-end antiques, repurposed as wine racks or jewelry boxes. But for those who know the history, they remain monuments to a time when humanity first organized its collective brain. The index card was the first step toward the global village. It taught us that information is only as good as our ability to find it. It proved that with a small piece of paper and a sharp mind, you could map the entire universe. So, the next time you find a file on your phone in a split second, take a moment to remember the dust, the ink, and the human CPUs. Remember the decimal dictator and his 7.5 by 12.5 centimeter revolution. The computer didn't kill the index card, it just gave it wings. The paper brain is still alive, humming silently behind every screen you touch. The drawers are closed, but the search never ends.